Memories of a friend now. Kevin Brennan succeeded Rhodri as MP for Cardiff West and is going to share with us some of his memories of his friend.
Rhodri Morgan was the most extraordinary person I've ever known, and I was extremely fortunate to have been his advisor through the intense political years between 1995 and 2000, as well as being a friend of his for 30 years. In that era of political spin, there were some who couldn't quite comprehend how a politician as free-range and organic as Rhodri could have the kind of political reach with voters that well-groomed, perfectly packaged politicians could only dream of. And Rhodri really did have that kind of reach. He could knock on any door, almost anywhere in Wales, and be recognised. The only question was if those he met would express delight and amazement at a visit from the First Minister, or simply say, "Hello, Rhodri," and invite him in for a cup of tea, as if he was a long-standing friend or a long-lost uncle. And many years before he became First Minister of Wales, we went together to a one-day cricket cup tie at Sophia Gardens, and we had a couple of tickets in the cheap seats. And at the time, there was a BBC Wales campaign, I don't know if anybody can remember it, in support of the team, which had the chant, "We love Glamorgan Morgan, we love Glamorgan Morgan." And it had been adopted by the fans. And as we went to take our seats, the crowded stand all stood up and started chanting, "We love that Rhodri Morgan, we love that Rhodri Morgan." And of course, many people have referenced his sporting obsessions, particularly his interest in rugby and Welsh athletics. In fact, the last time I saw him with Julie, the Saturday before he passed away, he leaned over during a break in the scintillating Indian dance performance we were attending at the National Museum to ask me to look up the score in the European Rugby Cup final on my phone. And famously, many years ago at the Hay Festival, the late great poet Danny Absey was remembering the Cardiff City lineup of his youth, but he couldn't remember the final name, and a voice from the back of the audience helped him out. And of course, it was Rhodri telling him who the player he couldn't remember was. But of course, our friendship was at root a political one, and it was events before and after the 1997 general election that forged Rhodri's place in Welsh history. And I have to be frank, he was blunt and quite mildly profane when he rang me up to tell me that Tony Blair had not appointed him to the government after the years he'd put in on the shadow Welsh Affairs team preparing for devolution before 1997. But as Julie said last week, Rhodri never dwelt on things for long. He didn't look back in anger. It amused me when he was First Minister that he liked to take visitors out on the balcony upstairs next to his office in the other building to show them all the things he had unsuccessfully opposed. Like the barrage out here, or this building, actually, initially, which he used to call originally the Lean-To. But he got to love it later on when he was First Minister for a while. But he never wasted time brooding on a setback. He embraced every setback as an opportunity. And in 1997, he quickly decided that he would stand for the Assembly and for the Welsh Labour leadership. And I think he understood more than anyone that devolution would change everything, and that it would fail, and that Labour in Wales would fail if it was believed to be a branch office of Labour HQ in London. In a real sense, that was the moment that Welsh Labour was born. He saw the real potential of devolution before anyone else. Even when intense pressure came on him to stand down, he was determined that there should be a contest. And I remember being told in that first contest that the Secretary of State would not have time to do any debates with Rhodri. And I explained that this was not wise, because 2 or 3 set-piece debates were all that was needed. But otherwise, Rhodri would get himself invited to every Labour Party branch in every little village in Wales. He'd drive himself there. He'd know half the people in the room. The other half would be related to him. He'd drink a swift half, he'd eat fish and chips, and he'd enjoy himself immensely. And of course, that's exactly how it proved. And of course, the rules in that contest didn't allow for a fully democratic vote, but there was no doubt who the people of Wales really wanted. And there was, of course, a second contest, but again, the stops were pulled out from the top to thwart him. But if Rhodri was anything, he was determined. And actually, he was stubborn. He believed passionately that he was the right person to make a success of Welsh devolution. And he knew that for Wales to embrace devolution, the leader would not just have to be from Wales, but would have to be seen to be made in Wales. It was another setback, that second contest, but typically he threw himself loyally into his work as an Assembly minister. And when he got the top job eventually, I was his special advisor, and our first visit was to Ireland with Paul Murphy, who's going to be speaking later. The Irish loved him because he was loquacious, he was learned, he was witty, and as my Irish father would say, he could talk the hind legs off a donkey. And it made me think that perhaps the real reason the London establishment never took to Rhodri was that they didn't really understand his very Celtic way of communicating. It was a slightly circular way sometimes of communicating. They seemed to think he was joking when he was serious, and that he was serious when he was joking. Like when the London media reported it absolutely straight when he said he enjoyed being driven around in the First Minister's car with a number plate TAF 1 on the front. The Irish got his enjoyment of the playful art of seemingly pointless but actually deeply illuminating conversation in a way that the efficient functionaries of the metropolitan establishment never could. Many people have spoken about how in later years Rhodri randomly gifted them produce from his garden. And one woman said rather memorably to me last week, he honoured me with his rhubarb. And in a way, that's how I feel about the many hours of meandering conversation that he and I had in the office or in the pub or at the rugby or on long car journeys or at party conference or down at the Riverside Market. He honoured me with his rhubarb. He honoured all of us with his rhubarb. It was a privilege to converse with someone so genuinely interested in everyone and everything, and for whom conversation was an art to be explored and enjoyed, and for whom the most painful pun, like his famous one, last Quango in Powys, was a treasure to be celebrated, like the finest poetry. Not that there was anything shallow in Rhodri's cultural life. He enjoyed art, music, and poetry, as he loved politics and he loved sport. And ironically, words cannot adequately encapsulate this remarkable Welshman, this everyman, this sometimes somewhat dishevelled figure with his unique, unruly hair, who treated everyone equally, who loved people of all races and backgrounds, particularly his Cardiff West constituents, who loved life, who loved his family, particularly his grandchildren, who loved nature, loved to grow things in the soil, loved to swim with dolphins in Cardigan Bay. No words can adequately capture him, but when I thought of Rhodri and his sudden passing and of the mortality that we all share with him, these words of the great American poet of democracy who Rhodri loved, Walt Whitman, came to mind. A child said, "What is the grass?" fetching it to me with full hands. How could I answer the child? I do not know what it is any more than he. I guess it must be the flag of my disposition, out of hopeful green stuff woven. Or I guess it is the handkerchief of the Lord, a scented gift and remembrancer designedly dropped, bearing the owner's name some way in the corners, that we may see and remark and say whose. Or I guess the grass is itself a child, the produced babe of the vegetation. Or I guess it is a uniform hieroglyphic, and it means sprouting alike in broad zones and narrow zones, growing among black folks as among white, Canuck, Tuckahoe, Congressman, Cuff. I give them the same, I receive them the same. And now, it seems to me, the beautiful uncut hair of graves. Thank you, Rhodri, for honouring us all with the gift of your friendship and company, and with the legacy of your life and leadership. Diolch.